Coming to you live from sunny Los Angeles, California, it's the Pop Culture Urbanism NOLY Awards. Tonight, we're looking back at the films that moved us and inspired us to look more deeply and more clearly at the urbanism that's all around us. Peak among these are independent films, or indie movies if you're in the industry. Probably due to their low-budget, independent nature, these indies often highlight the constant and direct impact that urbanism, affordability, and cities have on the lives of ordinary people. And you see, I only really watch Criterion's or maybe the occasional A24 film. And to start us off, these are the nominees for Best Urbanist Picture. In Noah Baumbach's 2012 mumblecore Frances Ha, Greta Gerwig plays Frances Holiday, a dancer in New York City living with her best friend and roommate Sophie. But through the events of the film, we see how the pressure of making rent plays a massive role in their decisions. In New York City, as in expensive cities around the world, sharing rent is a major consideration for all kinds of relationships. In the first scene of the movie, Frances' boyfriend asks her to move in with him, which Frances declines because of the ramifications of her current roommate and best friend Sophie. This is the proximate cause for why Frances and her boyfriend break up. But then Sophie moves out with a new friend in the coveted neighborhood of Tribeca. Sophie even mentions that this other friend has rich parents who can cover the deposit and guarantee the income requirement, which, if you're not familiar, can get kind of insane in New York City. This leaves Frances high and dry. Her struggle to make rent ends up motivating a lot of her decisions moving forward, including her friendships and relationships throughout the film. Despite being middle class and probably able to provide for herself anywhere else in the country, in a place like New York City, Frances really struggles.
Do you know that I'm actually poor?
You aren't poor. There are poor people, you aren't one of them.
When the pressures of rent get to be too much, Frances does what most young middle-class people do in New York City. They move back in with their parents. Of course, being back in her hometown of Sacramento, especially for a performance artist like Frances, this becomes more and more of a drag, so she decides to return to the city despite knowing how difficult it is to live there. And this illustrates something fundamental about cities. As Alain Berthaud describes them, cities are a manifestation of different labor markets. Sometimes when I read the papers of my fellow urban planners, I get the sense that they think cities are Disneyland or Club Med. Cities are labor markets. People go to cities to find a good job. Firms move to cities, which are expensive, because they are more likely to find the staff and specialists they need. If a city's attractive, that's a bonus. But basically, they come to get jobs. In certain respects, Frances probably does see New York City as a special place more so than her hometown, but at a minimum, New York City is a functional location where she can market her skills as a dancer and dance instructor. This distinction is made even more clear when Frances decides to hop to Paris for a weekend, where the glitz and glamour of the City of Lights is actually portrayed as fairly pointless for Frances. So she returns to New York immediately to see if she can join the dance company full-time. She can't. In being turned down, she looks elsewhere for where she can grow her dancing career, finding a job with room and board as a summer RA at her alma mater upstate in Poughkeepsie. Unfortunately, she finds out RAs can't take part in the summer dance class, but again, her decision to go there in the first place was motivated largely by factors related to the labor market for dancing. In the end, she returns to the city to become a bookkeeper and part-time choreographer at her former dance company. At last, finding a sustainable career in New York, she finally moves into a new apartment with her own name on it, Frances Holiday. Sean Baker's 2017 slice of life drama, The Florida Project, depicts the pain and poverty of kids right outside Disney World in Orlando, Florida. Shot entirely on location at the Magic Castle Inn and Suites, we get a sobering look at families on the brink of homelessness. This is the painful reality. Orlando has one of the highest rates of poverty in the country at 19%, above the state rate of 15% and well above the national rate of 13%. According to the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, Orlando ranked the worst metro in the country for affordable housing, with only 13 units available for every 100 extremely low-income renters. That's the people we see in Florida Project. That's a severe shortage of housing at the bottom of the market, and a massive reason why people with little to no means have to rely on transient housing, like living in hotels. Any discussion of how urbanism plays a role in poverty should remember that the last 100 years has largely been a century-long war on low-income housing. From SROs to boarding houses, trailer parks to low-quality apartments. This isn't to say that all of those forms of housing were actually good and that the poor should just suck it up, but we have to recognize that imperfect as they may have been, by knocking them out of our cities, we created a massive chasm between the higher quality housing that we regulated for and whatever low-quality housing we left for our least well-off, like that in the Florida Project. We actually see a very clear portrayal of this chasm. There's a scene where the kids from the hotel play around in an abandoned condo development, and it's heartbreaking how these kids with so little and on the brink of homelessness can't live in an almost completed but ultimately abandoned condo. But that's the reality. We don't build enough housing, and we criminalize the forms of housing that people need, even in the Magic Kingdom. Joe Talbot's debut feature, The Last Black Man in San Francisco, is a ravishing film exploring the complexities of black identity, masculinity, and economic and racial disparity in the Golden Gate City. The film enters on two friends, Jimmy and Mont, and follows Jimmy's attempts to reclaim his childhood home, a beautiful Victorian house at the center of the Fillmore district. Historically, that neighborhood used to have one of the largest jazz scenes in the world, calling it the Harlem of the West, owing to its diverse community. But today, largely because of how expensive the city has become, it's become almost exclusive to the wealthy. In the film, we see both the breathtaking beauty and sobering reality of the city. We see how Jimmy and Mont have to stay with Mont's grandpa and share a room in a converted garage. We see the worlds of difference between historically redlined and polluted Hunters Point, where Mott's grandpa lives, and downtown San Francisco, where all the yuppies work, and the Fillmore district, where wealthy elites have taken over. We see homelessness. We see Jimmy's dad living in an SRO. We see all the worst parts of the city beneath their aesthetic surface, and it's devastating. In one scene in particular, the film highlights the Ellis Act, which allows landlords to evict rent-controlled units by going out of business and fully exiting the rental market, which normally means that the landlord turns the units into condos that sell for millions of dollars. This is exacerbated by the way that San Francisco heavily restricts privately owned land. Nearly 3/4 of the city's privately owned land is zoned for single-family or two-family housing, blocking the type of apartments that could house renters like Jimmy. That means that all growth can realistically only happen in the last quarter of San Francisco, which already houses all the businesses, college, and industry that the city depends on. Altogether, you have super high demand because of the growing tech industry, facing a restricted supply of housing due to both a lack of housing development as well as rent control rules, providing landlords with a strong incentive to remove their property from the rental market entirely. The outcome? San Francisco is facing the worst housing affordability crisis in the nation.
How much are they asking?
At least $4 million.
Before the pandemic, the median one-bedroom apartment went for $3,500 a month, and today it still tops out the country at $2,680. And if you're thinking of buying, brace yourself. That home is estimated to be worth over $3.1 million. Median sale price for a single-family home in San Fran is over $1.1 million. All of this is doubly heartbreaking, as Jimmy truly loves the city, its people, and his imagined home, illustrating something fundamental about cities, the way we imbue our personal identity and values into our homes and neighborhoods. The film is a testament to how human cities really are, representing them not merely as hubs of commercial activity, but as sources of meaning. We certainly don't want that emotional meaning to become a blank check for restricting growth, which is a big reason why Jimmy's house is so outrageously expensive in the first place. Instead, we need to remember it's people who make up cities, and we need to empower them to build and grow the communities and neighborhoods that they live in, not zone them, restrict them, and segregate them into how we imagine they should be. We should hope a city as beautiful and vibrant as San Francisco can truly live up to its potential. A city isn't a collection of buildings, it's a community of people.
You don't get to hate San Francisco. You don't get to hate it unless you love it.
Chloe Zhao's breakout feature Nomadland tells the story of Fern, a modern American nomad living out of a van and surviving on seasonal work. Based on a 2017 book of the same name, the film calls attention to the growing movement of people living out of cars, vans, and RVs. The film deftly blends the romance and struggle of the van-dwelling lifestyle. On the one hand, many are drawn in by the urge to travel and live life to the fullest. It's a mode of living that offers vehicle dwellers total freedom and flexibility. The film's depiction of Fern's sublime travels across the US captures this romance. At the same time, for many, vehicular homelessness is an act of desperation. With housing costs forever rising, not only in states like California, but across the Mountain West, and an endlessly transitioning economy, vehicle dwelling ensures maximum flexibility at minimal cost. While the film largely focuses on Fern's journeys across the Mountain West, where there's abundant free federal land to park on, the vehicle dwelling phenomenon has actually been most acute in states like California, where high and rising housing prices have driven many to live out of their cars. According to one estimate, nearly half of all homeless in Los Angeles now live out of a car. A total of 20,000 people lived in cars, vans, and RVs in 2020, a marked increase over 2019. And with housing prices in Los Angeles recently hitting record highs, don't expect that trend to reverse anytime soon. Notably, the film casts many actual vehicle dwellers, including key figures like Bob Wells, who literally wrote the book How to Live in a Car, Van, or RV, to speak for themselves. As the film captures, it's not black and white. For Fern, living out of a car might be a way to avoid a terrible shelter system, or keep herself free from being dependent on friends and family, or maybe even a sense of pride in owning your own home, even if it is a car. Wow, what an incredible slate of nominees. But it's time to finally declare the winner of Best Urbanist Picture 2022. I have here my jacket pocket. Drum roll, please. Wow, The Florida Project. Oh, hold on, sorry, there's more in here. Oh, and an honorable mention for Hot Fuzz.
Woo!
That's all for today's episode of Pop Culture Urbanism. Of course, we'll be doing the NOLYs next year. If you like what you saw here, leave us a like. If you have another urbanist movie that we didn't talk about, let us know in the comments below. It might be a nominee for a future award. And if anyone knows how I can get in touch with Sean Baker, we would love to mail him this $8 plastic award. Otherwise, it's going to kind of sit around. Hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you in the next episode.